mostly today and a little bit in 1 Peter chapter 3. We've been talking on the series of God and the family, and typically we go through a book of the Bible at a time, and this is kind of a short intermediate series we do. In summertime, people are kind of out and gone, and this is a time for us to really kind of hit kind of crucial topics related to what we are as a church. And family is one of those things where it doesn't matter who you are, you come from a family, or you've got family yourself, whether you're married and have kids, or maybe you have family, parents, brothers, siblings, grandparents, cousins, uncles, aunts, whatever it may be, or even family that, church family. There's all kinds of things that we put in that category of family. And so we're talking about family and what that means in response to who we are as children of God and as followers of Jesus Christ. How should we respond in those familial relationships? And how does our relationship with the Lord, should that change the way that we see those relationships? This is a topic, I think, personally for me, that's been near and dear to my heart for a long time. I feel like everything that I've been given in my life, my wife, my kids, everything that I have is all from the good grace of God. That He has given those things to me all because of His good favor. That I don't deserve a bit of it, right? This goes back to the gospel. We don't deserve salvation, yet Jesus died for us anyways out of His love for us. We sinned against God, and yet Jesus came after us to restore this relationship with us that we had messed up and screwed up. And in family, that has to be the kind of prerequisite of seeing everything else that we do in family relationships. Nick preached last week in Ephesians chapter 5, and all over Ephesians chapter 5 is this picture of the gospel. How the gospel must be the foundation for everything that we do. Not just something we say we believe, but that it functionally affects every single relationship. It's like, for many of us, you may say, I believe in blah, blah, blah. Fill in the blank of what you believe in. If that belief really is a true belief, it will then impact every aspect of your life. How many of you, when you get in the car that day, what if like you knew? Like if I get in the car today, there's going to be a car and he's going to hit me and it's going to kill me. If you knew that, would you get in the car that day and go? I mean, I bet for most of us would be like, I'm not going to drive today. In fact, I'm just going to stay inside because I have this information. When the gospel is foundational and we truly believe it, it will then impact every decision of our life, and especially those people that are closest to us. We're talking today about honor, love, and respect in a family. And think about one time, this was actually not too long ago, some of you shared this story before. I had an expired registration, and time seemed to just slip away from me, and weeks turned into a couple months. And I got pulled over by a police officer, and the police officer said, okay, you got an expired registration, you need to get this fixed. Like, yes, sir, I'll take care of this, get it fixed. Well, kind of forgot about that whole encounter. A couple months slipped by again, and get pulled over again in South Ogden. And like, yeah, do you know this, do you realize your registration's expired? And I'm like, I did know that. I had plans on getting this taken care of. Those plans didn't really work out well, and so it didn't happen. Like, okay, I'm giving you a ticket, but just to let you know, because of the time frame, like, you're going to have to go to court appearance and stuff and go before the court. And so I'm sitting there in the court, and they make everybody watch this video. And so, like, no matter if you got expired registration or you stole something from the store, you are in this same courtroom, and we're all together, and I'm like thinking to myself, right, I'm better than all these other guys that have these other issues, thinking of myself in this whole other lesson there about pride and that kind of thing going there too. But I'm sitting there, and this video's playing about felonies and misdemeanors and all these other things, and I'm realizing saying wait a second, that's what it says on my thing. And it's saying I could go to jail time. And I'm like, oh great, Lindsay doesn't know that I might go to jail after this. Like, I didn't tell her that. Do I get a phone call? No one has warned me. I've seen movies. I know how this goes, but when is this going to happen? So we're standing there, and the judge, he's sitting up there, and they're always called the Honorable Judge so-and-so. And there's something about that as you stand before the judge, as they are standing there, and they're demanding honor, that you respect them. And if you have a baseball hat on in the courtroom, they're going to ask you to take it off because they want you to respect them because of their position. And we can respect people in positions because of those positions. But the Bible talks about honor of other people, that we should honor and esteem other people better than ourselves. And this is something that I think is somewhat missing from our culture, this idea of honoring each other. And what does it mean? The Bible talks about honoring one another. It's just that you look at somebody and treat them better than you would treat yourself. But especially for us as Americans, like, we love our freedom, we love our ability to do what we want to do, and we love our freedom just to kind of take care of ourselves in whatever way we can. And so this idea of honor is somewhat foreign to us. But it shouldn't be. And you know, and sadly and unfortunately, the people we are most dishonorable to are the people that we are closest to. Why is it that our families seem to get the worst treatment from us? You ever thought about that? You ever treat like just your boss the same way you treat your wife, or the way you treat your husband, or the way you treat your kids, or the way that you treat your parents? I mean, you probably get fired. I mean, you know, like, we really thought about that. Why is it? Those people closest to us should see the gospel more demonstrated through their actions than anybody else. And as we continue on through Ephesians 5 and Ephesians 6, hope to show how honor, love, and respect is something that should come and flow from a gospel foundation that we display, husbands and wives, parents and children, children and parents. This should be an aspect in behavior that we just ongoing and we do. Let's read Ephesians chapter 5. We're going to be in verse 31, and we're going to go down to chapter 6, verse 4. In verse 31, it says, "Therefore a man shall leave his father and mother and hold fast to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh. This mystery is profound, and I'm saying that it refers to Christ and the church. However, let each one of you love his wife as himself, and let the wife see that she respects her husband. Children, obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right. Honor your father and mother. This is the first commandment with a promise, that it may go well with you and that you may live long in the land. Fathers, do not provoke your children to anger, but bring them up in the discipline and instruction of the Lord." Again, Nick talked a little about 31 and 33, but we're just going to kind of dig a little more into that this week. And just want to start that first verse in 31. "Therefore, a man shall leave his father and mother." In that, what has he just done? And all through chapter 5, he's talking about how a man leaves his parents and how he cherishes his wife more than his own body, and how a wife respects her husband and lovingly submits to him in his leadership. And as he lovingly, selflessly sacrifices his own interests, all for the sake of his wife, realizing that she is more important than himself, and he is leading in a way for her benefit and her honor and for her admiration and her benefit and her well-being. And this is how it's supposed to be. Two people sacrificing their interest for the benefit of each other. Like, that's the way the Bible has intended it. And in that is an entirely selfless practice that is so foreign to the way that we see family and relationships today. It's all about, what can I get out of you? Or how can you benefit me and what I want to do? And this kind of idea is so foreign to the way we deal with people. It's totally something that comes from God. It's the gospel. And in this is the way, it should be the foundation and environment, the way that we see relationships. And so first of all, we're going to talk about husbands and wives here in 31 and 33. And then we're going to drop down into parent and children relationships. But first of all, with husbands and wives, we're going to start first with you guys. So for guys, it talks about a man leaving his father and mother and hold fast to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh, in verse 31. This passage quotes Old Testament passage in Genesis chapter 2, all the way back to the beginning. The very first institution God establishes is the family. And he establishes this marriage dynamic to demonstrate what it's supposed to be and how a husband is supposed to love his wife in this way. What does he do first? He leaves his father and mother, all right, leaves this initial relationship. Now, doesn't mean he's no longer like spending time with his family anymore. Doesn't mean he doesn't like respect his mom and dad. We're going to talk about that in chapter 6. But it shows that a man leaves the interest of his family for the benefit and sake of his wife. Totally, again, a selfless act. I think in this, there's so much here that we see that becoming of one flesh, that the Bible talks about this mystery of husband and wife becoming one flesh by leaving and joining together. This whole idea of leaving family behind is something I think, honestly, if you really think through it, I mean, that's probably one of the biggest problems many marriages face, right? How about mom who wants to come in and say, are you raising your kids this way? I think you should do this, or I think you should do this, or dad coming over here, and saying something else. And you've got two mother-in-laws maybe going back and forth, and you have like the whole like total stereotype of the mother-in-law that's like terrible. And you see some of this of where it comes from. But as husbands, I think here, we're supposed to, for guys in the room, if you're a husband, you're married, your job is to love your wife in spite of what your family may say, to do what's in her best interest. That doesn't mean you don't love your mom and dad, but it means that you have to see her before anything else. It's totally self-sacrificial. Again, there's probably a lot of stories. I mean, just people in the room could share just through that and what that looks like. But it's totally a self-sacrificial thing. Second thing we're going to see here in verse 32 talks about the mystery about Christ and the church. What did Jesus do for his church, his bride? Jesus saw us as sinners, realizing that we deserve death and destruction, and instead of being destroyed in eternal punishment, what does he do? He comes after us and loves us sacrificially. Jesus is God. He created the universe by speaking it into existence. We see that in John chapter 1. And yet what does Jesus do? He goes after the very same people who sinned against him and said, I want nothing to do with you. That's the love of Christ in the gospel. And so a man is supposed to love his wife the same way. So guys, it doesn't matter if you think you're right in an argument. You're supposed to love your wife. It doesn't matter if you think you've been wronged or hurt or your pride's been hurt or destroyed. You love your wife. And when you think that you deserve some kind of special treatment, you remember what Jesus did on the cross for you. And you love your wife. If you're single in the room and this is like something where you're like, man, okay, so I'm thinking about getting married. I want to get married at some point. And you're thinking this could be an option for you down the road. If you're a guy in the room, you better be prepared to love your wife that way. That type of love is something that we'll never achieve to Jesus' standard. However, that is absolutely what's required. And I believe the reason why many marriages are just surviving and not thriving is because men are not stepping up to their roles to love their wives as Jesus loved the church and to demonstrate self-sacrificial love for their wives. If we saw that type of man stepping up in the lives of his family, think about what that would do for a family, what that would do for a community, what that would do for a church. Men, we are called to the highest standard, to follow Jesus' example, and you guys are not going to achieve it, but we are called to that. And in that, he says here a couple things in verse 33. However, let each one of you love his wife as himself, and let the wife see that she respects her husband. Now in this, and we're going to kind of camp out here for a little bit on love and respect just for a second. Now the Bible says that a wife, or the husband should love his wife as himself, and the wife respects her husband. Does it mean that the wife should only respect and not love her husband? No, it's not saying that. It's saying that just the husband should love his wife and not respect his wife? No, it's not saying that either. But I think he's getting at the core insecurities of husbands and wives, men and women. Guys, if you're in the room, what do guys are most insecure about more than anything else? It's their pride, what they can achieve, what they can do. And so at the core of every guy is a sense of wanting to be valued, wanting to be valuable. And again, I'm kind of stereotyping and generalizing to some degree. So if you go, I know an example that's kind of a caveat to this. You may think of those and may know of some of those, but just hear me out. I'm kind of talking more in broad brushes. I don't mean that there's not those who are not in certain areas or the capacities, or some women or some men are different. We realize that God has made us all different and unique, but by and large, typically guys get their value a lot by what they do. Why do guys are so big in sports? They want to show their stats. They want to know everybody to see what they're doing and how good they've done in their sport in which they play in. Or their job. How big is prestige in your job title or promotion? Or what happens if you don't get that promotion you think you deserved? Or what happens to you? You all of a sudden think, man, is something wrong with me? Am I not doing a good job? And so I think at the core insecurity of every guy is that value. For a woman, it's the same kind of thing, but it's in a different way. I think oftentimes for women is a tendency of wanting to be secure, comforted, to make sure that they have a home in place and ready, that they know that love is there and is not going away. And I can only speak for me and Lindsay and our relationship in our life, but I know that if things aren't good at home, they're not good anywhere else in my life. And if Lindsay doesn't feel as though I love her, she's going to feel emotionally distant and separated from me. My job is to love her sacrificially. And in that, I am demonstrating the love of Christ to her and to my children. And so at the core of us is this kind of nature and this kind of heartbeat that's there that says, this is who I am, this is what I'm supposed to do. So husbands, how do we love our wives? I'm going to turn to 1 Peter chapter 3 and look in verse 7. It says, likewise, husbands, live with your wives in an understanding way, showing honor to the woman as a weaker vessel, since they are heirs with you of the grace of life, so that your prayers may not be hindered. Likewise, husbands, live with your wives in an understanding way. You know, if we're supposed to lead men in the room, if you're husbands or guys, if you're single and you're thinking about marrying somebody down the road one day, how do you love your wife? Live in an understanding way. One of the things I think we do, have you ever heard the book like Men Are From Mars, Women Are From Venus? This pastor that I used to have, he said this now again. This is his quote. If you're upset at this quote, again, you can send emails to nick@redemptionutah.com. He'll answer all those for you. Just kidding. So he said that, now hear me out. I'll explain it, so don't initially get upset when you hear what I'm going to say. He said, all men are stupid and all women are psycho. And men and women have to figure out how to deal with their psychosis and their stupidity in a way that glorifies God, right? You mitigate. Now, I think men are also psycho and women are also stupid. We're just people, right? It's human beings. But in this, I think he hits a really important point. In that we all have sin and selfishness and everything else that goes on with us. And a lot of times we go, well, guys, I can't understand my wife. She's just totally different than me. She is different than you, and that's a good thing. That's supposed to be. God has designed it that way, and that's a good thing. That's a positive thing. And women, you go, man, I just can't understand my husband. He doesn't get it. No matter what I say, he just goes and looks at me like I'm crazy, and he just doesn't understand what I'm thinking. He doesn't understand what I'm trying to say. It's like, yeah, he doesn't understand what you're thinking because he can't read your thoughts, right? There's a whole other side of this. And so as men, as husbands, we have to love our wives in an understanding way. That means don't act as though you have it all figured out. And don't act as though she deserves to say things in such a way or to treat you in such a way for you to understand. We should strive and be the best students of our wives. Understand who she is. Understand her heart. Understand what makes her tick. What does she love to do? What's her passion? What's her uniqueness? Who has God made her to be? And in that, we glorify God. Instead, what we tend to do is we go, I can't understand what's going on, so I'll just wait till she comes and talks to me. That's totally an unbiblical way of acting. We are supposed to love our wives in an understanding way. And it says here, showing honor, again, that word honor, to the woman as a weaker vessel, since they are heirs with you of the grace of life, so that your prayers may not be hindered. Now, you may see that word, weaker vessel, and go, okay, was he saying that like men are superior to women? No. Men and women are equal in the sight of God. There's not one that's better than another. But both do serve different roles in the life of family and in the church. And so physically, if you just look at the strongman competitions, no matter how hard you look at that, there's never going to be a woman who's going to be lifting the same weight as the strongest guy in the world is. Genetically, our bones are just different, and our structures, body types are just different. We realize that there is a difference between men and women, and that is not something that we should think is like totally a bad thing, or our culture has kind of totally misused this. It's okay that that's that way. My wife is good at things that I am not, and I'm good at things that she is not. God has uniquely designed us both for different roles in the family. And that's a good thing. My wife is more aware of things that I am not. She has more emotional intelligence in places that I don't. Right? Maybe if I'm more physically strong, that may be one thing, but in terms of other sides of the family dynamic, without my wife, it would not flow the way that it does. I'd need her, and she needs me, a part of this mutual relationship where we both help each other in a way that honors and glorifies God. But those roles are different, and we do not need to be afraid of that. And so men, to understand that your job is to be the initiator. I firmly believe, just as Jesus initiated in the church, we should be the initiator in our marriages. And that's the way that we love our wives. Wives, it talks here a lot about respect, respecting your husband. I think, why the focus here on respect? And I think a lot of times because men, we don't deserve respect. We have not lived in such a way that we deserve respect. We don't have done enough or done enough good things for our wives in order that she says, yeah, you should just have this. But ladies, this is what the Bible says. This is a way that we honor and glorify God, is through respecting your husbands, even when he makes terrible decisions. How can you honor him and love him the way that Jesus loved you through that process? How can you help build him up, encourage him, help him to be a better husband, a better leader of your home? How can you do that? By serving him, by loving him, by helpfully praying for him, encouraging him in the Lord, not coming after him, attacking his weak points, but really trying to build him up and help him to follow the Lord the way that God has designed it. And what does it say? Let's look in 1 Peter chapter 3, verse 1 and 2. It says, "Likewise, wives, be subject to your own husbands, so that even if some do not obey the word, they may be won without a word by the conduct of their wives, when they see your respectful and pure conduct." Peter kind of hits it home pretty hard. In the same way that husbands should love their wives, even their wives don't deserve it, wives respecting their husbands even when their husbands don't deserve it. He even is talking here about a case of if you're married and your husband's not even a believer. How do you demonstrate the love of Christ to him? By respecting who he is. And in that husband may become a believer because he's seen his wife's pure conduct before the Lord. The truth is, we answer to God. We're not answering to our spouses. Nick talked last week about the way that we follow under Christ's lordship and headship. And that as we follow Jesus, in that, and we demonstrate our relationships to our husbands and wives, that we are demonstrating love to the Lord. So if you're trying to love your wife and your wife has been kind of a jerk to you, you love her anyways because Jesus loved you when you were a jerk to him. Wives, respect your husbands. Even when he doesn't deserve it and he's been a jerk, how can you show him respect and love? Now, I'm not talking about being in an abusive situation or anything like that, but I'm talking specifically about how to do this in a way that honors and glorifies God. When we do this, we are demonstrating a picture of the gospel to the community around and also to our kids and our families. Our kids are going to see more of a picture of this than anybody else. Your children are picking up everything that you do and everything that you say. Your kids know more about your relationship with your wives and your husbands than anybody else does, and they are watching. In fact, most likely, they're going to be taking on practices and behaviors that you've demonstrated, and they're also going to demonstrate them to their future families. That's a scary thought, isn't it? Every time you get upset, your kids know it. They know the buttons to push. They know the sinfulness of your heart. They know all of that. And they are learning and watching, and they're modeling. I don't know how many times I've walked in the room with my kids, and they're playing house. You know, they're pretending to be the mom and the dad, and they're playing these roles out, the roles that they've seen us carry out. My daughter loves to be, the mom because she can tell the kids what to do. That's fun, and the dad, because my son likes to be the dad because he feels he could tell the kids what to do because it's fun to do that. And so they're modeling us, they're watching us. Everything that we do, our kids are going to carry on the legacy that we pass on to them. Second point here is parents and children. Let's look down in chapter 6, verse 1. "Children, obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right. Honor your father and mother. This is the first commandment with a promise, that it may go well with you and that you may live long in the land." So the first question is this adult children or is this just young children? Who's he talking to? Well, when the book was written to the Ephesians were composed of a church of young and old. And they had young children there as well as they had adult children. And honestly, in a lot of these situations in the ancient Near East, you had generational families living together. Like in a lot of cultures of the world, you would have one big kind of compound, and you'd have grandma living next door, and Uncle Joe living, on the other side, and you had all these people living around you. And so this was probably somewhat of a sticking point for many people, very different than the way their culture is set up today. So is it talking about adult children or young children? Well, first of all, let's look back at what Ephesians 5 says. "A man shall leave his father and mother, and cleave to his wife, and they shall become one flesh." So we realize that there's something about the familial relationship, for at least for a husband and a wife, in which dad has to take precedence over their family. That means that when you make decisions, you're looking at what honors your wife and family first before you look at what is something that follows your parents. Your parents tell you to do something, follow their word or follow their command, and it doesn't help your family thrive. That may be something you say, okay, to mom and dad, I love you, but this is the way we have to go. Now, if you're a teenager in the room, if you're a child in the room, that doesn't apply to you, right? You're to obey your parents. In that, you are demonstrating the gospel to your parents. And guess what? Your parents aren't always going to make the right decisions because they're people. Your parents aren't always going to do what's right because they're people. But to demonstrate the gospel to them, to love them as Jesus loved you, you're to obey them, to follow them, to love them the way that Jesus has loved you. In doing so, you're demonstrating the gospel even to your parents. I think for those of adult children in the room, if you're, again, not a kid, and you still have parents that are living, how do we do this? Well, I think it's in the sense of honoring. Some of you in the room may go like, well, I've got bad situation at home. I grew up with terrible parents. How in the world can I obey them? You have no idea what I dealt with growing up. You have no idea to see just the pain and suffering that I went through. I have no idea what situation you may have gone through in life. I have no idea who your mom and dad were. But I do know that even in those relationships, we can still honor our parents, the position in which they serve, even if we don't obey all their teachings. Sometimes you meet your parents, they did things that you would never want to emulate in your own family. You would never want to follow that. That's okay and good. But we can still honor them in the position they serve as parents, even if they were bad parents. And then secondly, we see here fathers. Fathers, and I think here, I think there's some relationship as well to mothers, and this is parents. But it says, fathers, do not provoke your children to anger, but bring them up in the discipline and instruction of the Lord. Okay, let's just be honest for a second as parents. And you don't have to raise your hands here or do anything else like that, but how many of you have been angry with your kids, have brought you to the point of being absolutely angry and frustrated? It happens because we're human beings. And in that frustration, right, there's a couple ways we can respond. We can't help the fact that we get emotional and get frustrated when our kids act in ways that we know they should learn. But we're supposed to respond in a certain way, again, by demonstrating the gospel. How do we do that? It says right here, do not provoke your children to anger. Sometimes as parents, we can be the cause of our own kids' bad behavior. That we're the cause of our own kids' bad behavior. Like, no, you don't understand. Like, I told depravity of the, human being. Absolutely. Humans are depraved, right? We see sinfulness of mankind in my 1-year-old when he bites my son, his older brother. Like, I see it right there. I see it when he tells me flat out no, but then looks at me and just stares at me. Like, what are you going to do, Dad? Right? I see the depravity in my 1-year-old. But I do know that if I'm frustrated at my kids, it tends to bring out more frustration in my kids. It kind of feeds on each other, feeds on itself. As parents, we can't let the emotions of our kids dictate our behavior. We can't do it. We have to let the gospel be the fuel for us as we love our children the way that Jesus has loved us. And by doing so, we have to be the initiator into setting the good example for our children. You're going to mess up and screw up. What do? Go tell your kids you screwed up and messed up. I wouldn't behave in such a way that I should have today. We've given our daughter permission when we've kind of got an angry voice and we shouldn't in a situation. She says, Mom, Dad, I think you kind of had a little bit of a angry tone there. And it's humbling because as a dad, I need to be called out when I'm a sinful parent. As a mom, you need to be called out when you're a sinful parent. And to hear that from your children, man, that totally changes the perspective and picture. But as parents, we need to be the initiators in our kids' well-being. We need to love them the way that Jesus loved us. And that means that we don't provoke our kids to anger. There's another thing, too, here. I realize that the way we can honor our kids is just spending time with them. Spending time with your kids. Not just coming down on them whenever they're doing something wrong, but trying to hear their heart. I think a way that we can honor our kids, this is, again, a kind of an idea that we don't really talk a lot about. How can you honor your children? How can you show respect and love to your kids? I mean, it gets a chance to hear who they are. Just get a chance to sit down with them, ask them some of those questions. Maybe they want to talk about their favorite TV show, and maybe they go on like a 10-minute conversation, a lecture about their favorite TV show, and you're like, I have no idea what they're saying right now. I have no idea who these characters are, but I'm just going to sit and listen to them. Just to honor your kids, to love your children. I love when my kids want to just talk to me, because one day there may come a time when they don't want to talk to you. And if you've not kept that relationship when they do want to talk to you, why are they going to open that door later and say, I want to have a relationship with my parents? When they're dating or they're having trouble at school, and you've not put in that time when they're little, why are they going to hear you when they're older? We need to honor our children. Now, in that, we discipline our kids. We spank in our family. We do timeouts. We do whatever works in our family to make sure our kids behave. And so I'll just go ahead and flat out say that. We want to make sure that our kids are honoring the Lord. Now, I don't ever want to do that in anger. Again, as parents, sometimes we get frustrated. But we should make sure that we are disciplining our kids, that we're putting parameters in place, that we don't let them run wild. We don't let them go crazy. We don't let them get whatever they want. And in so, we're teaching them to follow the Lord. Look here what it says in verse 4. It talks about this idea of instructing them in the Lord. I'll turn back here real quick. But bring them up in the discipline and instruction of the Lord. That our goal is to teach them about Jesus. That is our goal. Take the time to share with them your favorite Bible story. Talk about those things in the car ride home. We've put on the back of your bulletins, it's a bucket list of things that you can do with your kids. Use those things. Man, just try them out. Take your kid out in a one-on-one time. If it's a date or just some time together, and get a chance to hear the heartbeat of your child. Love your kids in the way that honors and glorifies God. And finally, that all in the family, no matter who you are, kid, parent, cousin, uncle, whatever. 1 Peter chapter 3, we're going to read verse 8 to 11. Finally, all of you have unity of mind, sympathy, brotherly love, a tender heart, and a humble mind. Do not repay evil for evil or reviling for reviling, but on the contrary, bless, for to this you were called, that you may obtain a blessing. For whoever desires to love life and see good days, let him keep his tongue from evil and his lips from speaking deceit. Let him turn away from evil and do good. Let him seek peace and pursue it. This passage here comes right after verse 7 of 1 Peter chapter 3, saying, finally, all of you. He just talked about husbands and wives. Now he's saying, all of you. This is how we should behave, that we should respond with unity, with sympathy, brotherly love, a tender heart, and a humble mind. Too often, we see our family relationships with pride and selfishness. We don't love our kids the way that will glorify God. We don't try to teach them in a way that will glorify God because, honestly, we're just busy. And we have so many other things that we want to do, and we don't spend that time with our families. Husbands loving your wives, wives loving your husbands. And if this applies to all those in the room. Kids, how do you honor your parents? How do you honor those in your family? How do you treat one another better than yourself? In that, you're glorifying God. And it finally says in verse 11, let him seek peace and pursue it. That we'd be peace pursuers in our family. Now, not just to avoid controversy or avoiding conflict, but to actually strive for peace. If you're a child in the room, that you can, again, obey your parents for peace in the family. Parents, that you would love your kids, that you would be able to find those ways to find peace in the family. Spend time with them. Don't just give up on them. Husbands, wives, how can you pursue peace, not just settling for just not fighting, but really pursuing peace and pursuing a thriving of your relationship? Again, I don't say this as somebody who's arrived. Man, I feel like a failure as a husband, as a father all the time. There's some days where I feel like, man, I just really screwed up today. I feel like I just didn't love Lindsay the way that she should be loved. And I feel like I really love my kids the way that they should be loved. The other day, it's just kind of Lindsay and I both, we kind of realized that our kids had kind of hit us at kind of on those frustration points. And one of our children had done that. And I realized that I looked back and saw my child in the car and realized that just their face was so distraught. And like I'd acted out, I said some things in anger, was frustrated. It wasn't in a way that glorified God. I remember looking back and thinking, I totally messed up. Totally messed up as a dad. Totally acted out of selfishness. I totally acted out of pride. That is not what glorifies God. That's not the way that I should behave, and that's not the kind of example I want to set to my kids. Go back to and apologize. You know, what's the beauty about kids? Kids go, okay, I forgive you. And I just think, as adults, how many of those things do we hold back when it comes to forgiveness and someone's wronged us? But man, to see the sweetness of my kids and to see the way they demonstrated the gospel to me as a parent is something that's pretty special. And I think no matter who you are, whether it's a family relationship you've got now, maybe one you don't, and you're preparing for family relationships, just being married one day, how can you demonstrate selflessness and sacrificial love in a way that honors and glorifies Jesus?